like to welcome everybody to the Right Word Division, and this will be the first video in a series of videos that will be doing a Bible study on the Olivet Discourse that you can find in Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21. And we will be studying upon line, precept upon precept, in each one of these gospels with each one of the Olivet discourses. Excuse me, and we'll go line upon line and see what these things really say. I think there's a lot of things that people miss. You know, not everybody, but there's a lot of people that missed it, and I know these things because I missed them. I used to miss these things when I read, and a lot of times I was reading what other people had told me. You know, and I was reading the word through the eyes of other people. So I don't want you to read the word through my eyes at all. I want you to take what I'm saying, be like the Bereans, take what I'm saying and study it for yourself and seek God for yourself. Like I said in the intro to this video, if you didn't watch it, um, seek God for yourself. Be a Berean and see if what is being said here is really there. Is really what is being said, and evaluate it. And don't just clear your mind of what you think you might know, and come to the scriptures empty. Come to the scriptures empty and let God fill you up with his word. That's what I do every time I come to the word of God. I empty myself of what I think I know or what I think I figured out or any of that. And I just come to the word looking to excuse me, looking to be filled with the Lord's word. Let God do his work in me and give me the understanding. So let's just start. I'll start Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. And like I said, I'll be going back and forth with Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and the Olivet Discourse. And to paint the picture, if you're not familiar with it, for anybody that isn't familiar, Jesus had just left the temple. He was in the temple talking to the Pharisees, and he had just said some might say some harsh things to them, and he had made some predictions, and he leaves the temple with his disciples, and that's where it starts what people call today the Olivet Discourse. And I'll start here in Matthew 24. Might as well just get it started. And it says here, Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. So that's the first verse in Matthew 24. It says Jesus left the temple, like I said when I was painting the picture, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. So his disciples come to him and they're trying to point out the spectacular buildings that the temple is, and they have been building this temple for like 40 years, and this is actually the temple that the second temple that was built after Solomon's temple, which was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And the temple was rebuilt, but then at this time, the temple that Jesus was walking out of in the first century with his disciples, Herod had built on to the temple, the second temple that was built after the Jews had gone back to Jerusalem in the Old Testament. They built another temple, excuse me, and this is the temple that Herod had continued and made additions to, and really made this thing a lavish thing. And if you study history on the temple at this time, I'm not going to get too deep into that. This was the wonder of the world at that time. People, not only Jews but Gentiles, would come from miles and miles to come to this temple, and they would bring gifts and bring offerings, and they, because it was such a marvelous looking building. So this is what they're trying to show Jesus here. But before I move to the next verse, I want to go to see what, if we can get any more understanding. We might not. It might be the exact same thing. But let's read what Mark's account says. Mark chapter 13, verse 1. And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, so, Master, See what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Now, this is what I was talking about parallel text. In Matthew's account, we see that Matthew just says his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. In Mark's account, it says that one of his disciples said it. So we know now that his disciples came to him, but only one of them pointed it out to him. Now, they all probably were coming to show him, but one of them got to speak up before the other ones and said, hey, look at the temple, Jesus. Look at this great temple. And it says, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Like, wow, this is an amazing thing. This is something that was amazing to them in the first century. I mean, the temple buildings that Herod had built. And that's the only thing I see different about what Mark just said than what Matthew said, is that he actually singles it down to one disciple that was the one that spoke up. But it still says that, Matthew let us know that there were more than one disciple there, and Mark does not disclude that. He just says that one of them was the one that spoke up. So let's go to Luke chapter 21, but instead the parallel text in Luke is not the first verse in chapter 21, it's actually the 5th verse. And Luke 21 verse 5 says, and as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said. So that's what verse 5 says. It says that as some spoke of the temple. Now, Luke does not say it's the disciples, but we know, because we just read the parallel text in Matthew and Mark, that the some that spoke here in Luke, verse 5, are his disciples. They spoke to him about the temple and how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. Now, Jesus responds to this. So we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 24. If I'm moving too fast for you, I'm doing it because of the time of the videos. But you can always pause the video, turn the pages in your Bible or whatever you may be, and go to the next chapter to see, so you can follow along. But I'm going to move like that throughout the study just for time reasons. And verse 2, Matthew 24 verse 2 says, and Jesus said unto them, see you not all these things? So what is Jesus talking about? So they're pointing out the temple to him. He turns around and points it back to them and says, do you not see all of these things? Meaning the temple. A physical body temple that was sitting there, the temple that Herod had made all of the excavations on. Verily I say unto you. So who's the you? He says, verily I say unto you. He's speaking to his disciples, because we know it was his disciples that came with the conversation about the temple to him. And he says, verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So wow. Jesus tells them that, okay, yeah, I see these buildings, but do you see them? And you take a good look at them, because every single stone that you are looking at and pointing out to me are going to be thrown down. It's going to be destroyed. So that's the account that Matthew gives to us. Let's see the parallel account here in Mark. And Jesus answering, and this is Mark chapter 13 verse 2. Mark chapter 13 verse 2. And Jesus answering said unto him, seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So remember, Mark's version, it was one disciple that spoke up, and it says here that Jesus answering said unto him. Okay, but of course all of his disciples were, the other disciples who came with that one disciple that spoke up was listening as well. And he says, seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So it connects with what Matthew said. Nothing much different, other than he said it to the one disciple, but we know that all of them were listening. Now let's see the account that we get in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. Luke 21 verse 6 says, as for these things which you behold. So now Jesus tells them these things, meaning that temple that you're looking at. Who was looking at? his disciples were looking at, the days will come in the which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So Luke words it a little differently, but it's the same context, same thing. Doesn't disqualify anything that we've read so far in Matthew or Mark. He tells them that the buildings that they were looking at, not me or anybody else, but they were looking at, that building would be thrown down and not one stone will be left upon it. Okay. So I think we got an understanding here of the fact of the things that I want to point out is that this whole discussion starts about the temple that they had just walked out of, the temple that Herod had just excavated and made it such a luxurious building. It took 40 years to build that temple. That's the temple that this discussion is about. And Jesus says that temple, that one that was standing there in the first century when he walked in it, that's the temple that he says was going to be destroyed and thrown down. And that's very important to understand that's the temple he was talking about. He said that the temple that they were looking at, it was that temple that his disciples in the first century were looking at. Now, let's go to Matthew 24 again, verse 3, and move on. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? Now, let me first just clear up. The end of the world, that word that's world there is eon in the Greek, which means age. Okay, the end of the age. It's not talking about the earth, the planet, or anything like that. They didn't ask about the end of the planet. They asked about the end of the age. What age? The Mosaic age. Because the Jews understood that once the Messiah came, that would put an end to the Mosaic age, the age of Moses. And it would open up the age of Messiah, the Messianic age is how they understood it and they knew it to be. And once that Messianic age started, it would never end. Never. So just wanted to clear that up. But let's go back as he says, and so Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives, which was right by the temple. So he walked and he sat on the Mount of Olives. And his disciples came unto him privately. So that could have been all 12 of his disciples. It could have been 2 or 3. Who knows? But we'll see. The disciples came unto him privately. So that's the key word. They came by themselves. It was only Jesus and his disciples, however many that might have been, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? So he tells them the temple will be destroyed, and they ask him, well, when will that happen? Now notice the weird thing is, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? I don't think these are 3 separate questions of their own. Okay? These are 3 questions that have to do with what Jesus had just told them. So for some reason, the apostles, at that time, the disciples took what Jesus said about the temple as meaning what? They took it as, okay, the temple will be destroyed, 1. 2, that it was a sign of the coming of Jesus Christ. 3, it was the end of the Mosaic age, end of the age. So those are the 3 things here that we get. They wanted to know, if you're saying this temple is going to be destroyed, when will these things be? When will the temple be destroyed? The sign of your coming and the end of the age. It's all one thing connected with the temple. So if the temple is destroyed, that means to them that that's when his coming would be, and that's when the end of the old age would be. But let's go on and see what is said in Mark. Mark chapter 13, verse 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. Now, what Matthew told us, he said the disciples came. You see why it's good to use parallel text? Because you get more information. You get the Mark here. Mark gives us the names of who those disciples were. Now we don't have to guess and say, was it 12? Was it 5? You know, we know that it wasn't all 12. We know that it was Peter, James, John, and Andrew. 4 of his disciples came to him privately to ask these questions. Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? So now look what Mark does. In Matthew, the questions were asked in three different ways, as far as when will these things be, when will be your coming, and when will be the end of the age. But instead, Mark lumps them all together. He says, and what shall be the when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all of these things shall be fulfilled? When should these things happen? What will be the signs when all of this stuff will happen? Okay, so he lumps it all together, meaning when will be your coming, when will be the temple destroyed, and when will be the end of the age? When will all of those things be fulfilled? So they're all connected together. Now, let's go to see what Luke has to say about the same situation. And it's Luke 21, verse 7. And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? Now, Luke doesn't tell us that they went to the Mount of Olives, but we don't need to have Luke tell us that, because we already know Matthew and Mark let us know where this comment or this conversation was being held. It was at the Mount of Olives. And Mark lets us know exactly who was in the conversation: the 4 disciples and Jesus. So Luke just says, and they asked him. See, he doesn't go on to name them. He says, when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? Same thing. Luke lumps them all together. He doesn't separate them as 3 different questions that Jesus is going to answer in 3 different ways. It's all one. He lumps it all together. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there. This video is getting a little long. And we'll go on into the next video and continue. So until then, God bless. And I'll see you in the next video, God willing.